Good morning. I'm here to welcome you to Health Today. We have a great show. We're going to be talking about heart problems. We're going to be talking about epidemiology or the search for longer life. We're going to be talking about all kinds of great things today. We're even going to be talking a little bit about aspirin. So, stay tuned. I'm going to try to play some of this out so you can understand the relationships between some of these topics. And so make sure you're with us. But first, we want to announce, of course, as we do each week, our weight loss seminar on Tuesday evening, 6:30. A lot of you people out there that are listening have not been to the seminar. I would invite you to come, specifically you, because, I know that if you're listening to the show, you're interested in health. If you're interested in health, you're interested not only in your own health, but the health of both those people around you, your family members, etc. And what we have a lot of times is we have people coming to this seminar who have loved ones and close friends who need to take off weight for health reasons. I mean, we love our friends, no matter what they look like a lot of times, but, well, all the time, hopefully. But we also want them to be healthy, want them to be around. We want them to enjoy the benefits of seeing their children and grandchildren grow, et cetera. And so with that kind of an interest, even if you don't need to lose weight yourself, it's something that you can come in, learn about, tell your friend or your family member that I went to the seminar, it was really great, go with me again, and we're going to hear some good things. And a lot of people show up that way. In fact, we have one weight loss person, a dieter that actually their entire family came to the seminar, and about half of them didn't need to lose weight at all. One of them had to lose significant amount of weight, like 150 pounds minimum. And they came to the seminar and they were there to support. It was kind of like an intervention. This person was unable to walk up steps. They were unable to do the things that they needed to do, were required to do. And so when they all gathered together, did a family intervention, brought them to the weight loss seminar, that person took the bulls by the horn and just, wrestled it with the bull and got things going and made a great improvement in their life. They lost around 150 pounds, and now they can not just walk upstairs. You say it's something upstairs I didn't get, and they're up there getting it for you before you even know it, because they're so happy with the results. And of course, when you're carrying around, in excess of 400 pounds, you know what? You gain some pretty significant muscle. When you lose 150 pounds of that, you can run upstairs pretty quickly with not much stress whatsoever. The knees don't hurt anymore, ankles don't hurt anymore, and hips, et cetera, et cetera. All of that pain just seems to magically go away, although it's not magic at all. So, don't hesitate to come to the seminar, even if you're not overweight yourself. Come and get the information, have it available so that you can help other people. I know that you people out there, when I say welcome to health on the show here, there's a large sense in which you have a lot more influence on this than I do, because, I'm involved with a business, right? And you are a third-party person out there that can have an opinion that is objective. So getting your friend in to the seminar is something that you can do a lot more effectively than I can do it. But I promise you, it'll be a good time. You'll enjoy the seminar. If you enjoy the show, you'll love the seminar, believe me. Okay, so let's kind of get into the topic a little bit. Today, we're going to be talking about vitamin K. We're going to be talking about both forms of vitamin K, K1 and K2. Okay, this is something that we talked about recently, but it's something I want to get into a little more because there's lots of more information coming out. K2 in particular was a recently discovered vitamin, and it has influence on so many different metabolic processes in the body. It's just absolutely incredible. But we're going to talk about K1 first, because K1 was discovered years ago, decades ago actually, and it's called vitamin K because in German, clotting is spelled with a K. Okay, we spell it with a C for those of you who are terrible spellers like me. So vitamin K1, very, very important vitamin. It is involved with activating the platelets to actually clot and to seal off problems. When you're leaking, so to speak, when your blood is going out, you form a scab. And all of that scab there is caused by K1 activating the platelets to stick together and clog the hole, right? Now, we know that there's a lot of people out there who are on blood thinners. In fact, one of the go-to things whenever you have heart attack, stroke, etc., or they just even fear a possible heart attack or stroke, they put you on either a warfarin compound, one of the newer blood thinners also, or they put you on aspirin as kind of a minimal intervention. But most of you realize that that is not actually maybe solves one problem, but it causes other problems. For example, all of you have seen elderly people who have these big pools of blood under their skin. It's first kind of a reddish, and then it turns black after a while. And they call it a bruise sometimes, but it's not really a bruise. You know that. It's actually just a pool of blood that is under the skin, wanting to get out, but you don't want to prick the pool because then it'll bleed like crazy because they don't clot very well. If they were clotting properly, then the pool would maybe start a little bit, it'd be a little, and then it would form a scab, and then there'd be no problem. But what I want to do is kind of alert you a little bit because K1 is being hindered in that particular case, so it's not causing the platelets to stick together and clot the blood. But I want to just warn you, if that is something that you see in yourself, or when you just kind of scrape yourself a little bit, it bleeds like crazy rather than just kind of, sealing off right away, then you're probably going too far with it hindering the clotting factors. And the reason I say that is this. If you're trying to avoid a stroke, for example, one of the most dreadful kinds of strokes is when you get a brain bleed. And a brain bleed that cannot be stopped efficiently just keeps going. And when you are on anti-clotting medications or on aspirin, and what happens if you bump your head? What if you, get up real quickly and, you're bending down to get something, you bump your head on the kitchen counter, it really jars your head, and your vessels are so fragile, and you start bleeding in the brain. Well, there's no stopping it at that point. So even though this stuff is often given for prevention of strokes, because they don't want clots to form in the brain, so to speak, they also make you very vulnerable that if you do break a blood vessel in the brain, it might just bleed horribly. The other thing is this, that if you're taking these medications, you're also very vulnerable for gut bleeds. One of the things that happens with non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs routinely, especially in the very old, that in the middle of the night, they get a gut bleed, and by morning, they're just gone. They just, run out of blood, so to speak. And this is something that you really want to be cautious about. So it's very important to, in certain instances where you have problems, of course, to make sure you don't clot too readily. But on the other hand, it's very important to realize that you've got to balance that out and check how viscous or how well your clotting does, because you don't want to clot too slowly either. It's very important to attain that balance. So if you're getting bleeds under the skin, if your vessels are so fragile, and by the way, things like aspirin do actually cause fragile blood vessels. In the metabolism and the detoxification of aspirin, because aspirin is not something you want in high quantities in your body, but in the detoxification, you actually are using vitamins. For example, vitamin C, you're using certain factors like rutin, nutrients that actually build the integrity or the toughness of the blood vessels. You're actually using those things in the detoxification of aspirin process. And as a result, what happens is that when it comes for your body's nutrition to rebuild vessels and make them tough enough so they don't break, so they don't bleed, you're actually preventing that from happening. So there's a sense in which by taking the aspirin, and there's a few other drugs that do this too, in fact, the blood thinning drugs per se do this, you are using so much of your nutrition that would normally build your vessels into a strong configuration. It ruins that so that now you're even more fragile. So that now all you need to do is touch your arm and all of a sudden you have a pool of blood falling or filling up the surface underneath the skin. So it's very important to realize these things. Get that balance. If something's off, if you're having these big bleeds under the skin, get to your doctor and tell them this is not right. I am not taking the right amount of anti-clotting medication. Okay? Now, that's K1. That's the clotting vitamin. But what about K2? Well, K2 has a very similar structure, but if you know much about chemistry, you know that just small changes in chemical structure can make huge changes in function. For example, you know the testosterone and estrogen. Those molecules, if you looked at them, they're almost identical. As a matter of fact, testosterone can be turned into estrogen in just a couple chemical steps. So they're so close, but obviously they have very, very different consequences in the body, very different function in the body. So when it comes to K1 and K2, it's the same way. They have somewhat similar chemical structure, but they have radically different functions in the body. And one of the functions that K2 has is to actually dissolve calcium out of the arteries, put it back into blood circulation. It goes to the bones. It takes the calcium out of the blood and puts it into bone. Now, this is very interesting because one of the things that the statin medications do is they actually block the utilization of K2. Now, many of you already know that coenzyme Q10, which is manufactured in the liver, the CoQ10, coenzyme Q10, that particular vitamin, is something that is blocked by statin medications. Well, it turns out that K2, vitamin K2 and coenzyme Q10, again, are not only of a similar structure, but they also can do similar things. For example, in the production of energy, K2 and coenzyme Q10 can play the same chemical role in the electron transport chain. That chain is responsible for making most of our energy molecules. Okay, the molecule is ATP for you science nerds out there, adenosine triphosphate, but they both can enter into the same step in the production of energy. And without ATP, without that energy molecule, nothing happens in your body. Believe me, I mean, all the way from muscle contractions, you make a fist right now, that's all powered by ATP. There's little electron pumps in your cell membranes that throw sodium and potassium around from the inside to the outside of the cell, run by ATP. There are bubbles dragged around in your cell, and it's fueled by ATP. Everything that moves in the body, every protein that has a shape that changes in the body, all of those are fueled by ATP. So this is a big deal. It's happening right now as you're listening. The only way you can hear me is because your listening mechanisms are fueled by ATP, okay? And K2 and CoQ10 can be interchanged at that one place where energy is produced. So I mean, this molecule, this K2 molecule, is a big deal. Now, let me just explain a little bit what that means to us. Because if statin medications interrupt the production of CoQ10 and the utilization of K2, then what's happening? Well, we've already said that K2 is responsible for absorbing calcium, the plaquing in the arteries, in the hardening of the arteries, because the calcium in the arteries is what's called atherosclerosis. Sclerosis means the deposition of stone. Sclera is the stone part. So the deposition of stone in the arteries, or calcium, the K2 dissolves that away. It stimulates a GLA matrix protein, and it dissolves that calcium away, puts it back into the blood. The blood takes it to the bones, and in the bone, there's a substance called osteocalcin, and that's put out by a little molecule that lays calcium into bone, and that osteocalcin is activated by K2 also. So it activates the osteocalcin. Actually, what happens is, if you can stick your two fingers out, your index finger and your middle finger out, in a fork, you open them up wide, and that forms a fork, and both of those ends of your fingers are negatively charged. And that's a carboxylation fork. And then the calcium, which has a double positive charge, remember opposites attract, has a double positive charge, it goes right in between, make a fist, and that's the calcium. And it goes right in between those two fingers and locks in there. You can do it right in front of you. Locks right in there, and now it's not going to leave. It's going to recalcify your bones. And I know a lot of you out there have osteopenia and osteoporosis. You've done the DEXA scan tests, they give you a diagnosis, and then they make you overload with calcium, by which I don't recommend. Moderate amount of supplementation of calcium is smart. An overdose, like over 500 milligrams, is way, way too much. But in any case, so it locks that calcium in there, and it's not going to leave your bones. Now, just an aside here, I want to tell you that K2 has kind of revolutionized part of my nutrition practice that relates to osteopenia and osteoporosis. Because before we started using K2 at the practice, what we found was that people would come in, I would recommend calcium, boron, selenium, all the different bone building nutrients, and we could usually stop the progression of the decalcification of the bones. In some cases, it didn't even work then. But now, since we've been using K2 for over 6 months now, a few of our patients have actually repeated DEXA scans. Namely, they repeated the test that you can use to test the calcification or the density of bones, okay? And what has happened is we're getting reports now back that they have actually started remineralizing their bone. They actually are getting better DEXA scans at this point with the use of K2. And it's particularly K27 for you people out there. We have it at the practice, the Welcome to Health Center. You can stop in. We can give you research papers on it if you like. But the main thing is that you start taking this every single day because it's that important. Okay, in a little bit, I'm going to tell you what time of day to take your K2 and things. But first of all, I want to tell you the story because I just never get tired of telling this story. It's so fun. Back in, several years ago, I'll just say about 10 or 15 years ago, the epidemiologists. Now, what is an epidemiologist? Those are the people that go around the world saying, why in the heck does these people live longer than these people? And so they kind of like look into it and try to find the causes for increased longevity. That's one of the things they do. They do a lot of other things too. But in any case, so the epidemiologists were out there and they noticed something striking. They noticed that the people of Eastern Japan live 7 to 10 years longer than the people in Western Japan on average. And this was striking. I mean, they said, what in the world's going on here, right? And so they started looking into it. Well, they found out that back in the Middle Ages, the two sides of Japan were warring together or against each other. And the Western Japanese people defeated the Eastern Japanese people. And I don't know if you looked into the history of the Second World War, but Japanese people are not necessarily gracious to their defeated enemy. And so the Eastern Japanese people had nothing to eat except their rotted soybeans. So that's what they did. They started eating their rotted soybeans. That's all they had. And what happened as a result is they got a taste for the rotted soybeans. Now they call them natto or fermented soybeans. And with that taste for the fermented soybeans, they just kept eating them and they kept eating them until modern days. Well, it turns out that soybeans, when they're fermented, has the highest percentage of K27 of any other food. And so what happened was they were getting these benefits that we talked about. They were getting enhanced bone density, which meant that as they got older, what's one of the main things that kills older people? Bone fractures, right? Especially hip fractures. And what's one of the other things that kills everybody, most often after the age of about 35 or 40? Heart disease, exactly, clogging of the arteries, etc. So what they found was that the reason these people were living so much longer and so much more healthfully at the same time while they were living is that they had fewer hip fractures and less heart disease. Plus, by the way, they had all these energy benefits we were talking about before, which meant that they were not only living longer, they were living more exuberantly and more vivaciously, more energetically at the same time because they ate this natto, these fermented soybeans. So that explains the difference, but that is just absolutely amazing. Now, why didn't we know this before? Well, there's lots of things we still don't know, by the way. I mean, there's just incredible, there's an infinite number of things we don't know yet about how reality functions and fractals together to create human beings like us and, cell function, etc. We have none of that stuff. We don't even know our own psychology, It's just so difficult to put all that together. But in any case, that's what's going on there. That's why we discovered it. K2 is one of the most important nutritional discoveries that we've made in the last, 20 years. Now, when should you take K2? K2-7 particularly. When should you take that? Well, the best time to take it is always with in the morning with D, vitamin D, because they work together to promote bone density increases. Okay, you do it with D, and you do it in the morning because that's when you have the most acid to use for your digestion. And also do it with some fatty foods. For example, one of the things that I enjoy in the morning is eggs. And eggs have that wonderful fatty yolk in the middle, and what that does is that enables the K2 to be transported to the right places in your body. So if you don't if you don't have a fatty meal like that, maybe you should do some MCT oil, some medium chain triglycerides, just a tablespoon of that, some olive oil, or some grapeseed extract, something along with it, just to kind of aid in its absorption and its utilization. So that's when you should do it, in the morning. Now, you already know that eating your biggest meal in the morning is advantageous anyway. The blood sugar doesn't spike as much. You never want to eat your big meal at night because the acid production is a lot lower at that point. And because it's so much lower, then you're going to it's going to be sitting there, and your chances of acid reflux go way up. So, take most of your supplements in the morning with a good breakfast with some fat in it, and you're going to be doing well. Your other fatty vitamins like vitamin A, vitamin E, all these things are going to do a lot better in that kind of environment also. So that's something that we're going to be talking about more, but that's something you need to do. But stop by at the Welcome to Health Center, pick up some vitamin K2-7, and we will love to talk to you about it and love to meet you there. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye.